Imagine holding a map that has been intentionally blurred for 400 years, only to have a single drop of liquid suddenly make the entire image come into sharp, crystal-clear focus. For tens of millions of Black Americans, the quest to find their specific ancestral home has been like trying to solve a puzzle where most of the pieces were thrown away. We've been told for generations that the history was simply too broken to fix, that the records were too thin, and that the connections were lost to time. But geneticists have just completed a massive comparison study, taking the DNA of modern African Americans and running it against a newly sequenced database of ancient remains from West African burial sites dating back to the 1400s. The scientific community expected to see general overlaps, but what they actually found sent a shockwave through the field of anthropology. The match wasn't just close. It was a precise, high-definition biological mirror that revealed a secret history of survival and specific regional origin that had been completely erased from the written record. Today we are looking at how ancient DNA is finally speaking the names that were silenced centuries ago, and why the genetic map of Black America is far more sophisticated than anyone ever imagined. To understand why this match is so shocking, you have to realize how generic the story of African ancestry in the Americas has been treated in the past. For a long time, the narrative was that people were taken from somewhere in West Africa and shuffled into a giant melting pot, where all specific ethnic identities were lost. Most commercial DNA tests would simply give a broad result like West African or Nigerian. But this new study didn't look at broad categories. They looked at haplotype clusters, the unique genetic signatures that act like a GPS coordinate for an ancestor's specific village or linguistic group. When they compared these signatures to the ancient remains found in regions like the Bight of Biafra, the Gold Coast, and the Senegambia region, they didn't see a random mix. They saw genetic anchors. The scientists discovered that modern Black Americans aren't just a random assortment of continental DNA. Instead, they found that specific families in the United States today are direct, high-percentage matches for very specific ancient groups that had specialized skills. For example, the DNA from ancient remains in the inland regions of what is now Mali and Burkina Faso showed a massive genetic echo in the populations of the South Carolina Lowcountry. This isn't just a coincidence. These ancient groups were experts in rice cultivation. The DNA proves that the people brought to those regions weren't chosen by accident. They were targeted for their biological and technological expertise. We are seeing a functional genetic map where the skills of the ancestors are still written in the blood of their descendants. But here is where the results got truly unexpected. When the researchers looked at the diversity coefficient, they found that many Black Americans actually have a higher level of ancient genetic preservation than some people currently living in West Africa. How is that possible? It's because Africa has experienced massive internal migrations, conflicts, and population shifts over the last 400 years. In many cases, the original genetic signature of a specific 18th century kingdom was actually better preserved in the isolated descendant communities of the Americas than it was in the home region, which saw constant turnover. The scientists were finding bioarchives in places like Virginia and Maryland, people who carry a genetic snapshot of an Africa that has since changed. This means that Black Americans aren't just looking for their history in Africa. In a very real sense, they are the living history of kingdoms that no longer exist on the continent. The study then moved into the Igbo connection, which has always been a subject of oral tradition. By using ancient DNA from sites in southeastern Nigeria, the scientists were able to prove that the Igbo influence in American genetics is significantly higher than historical shipping manifests ever suggested. In the Maryland and Virginia area, the Igbo signature was so dominant in the ancient comparison that researchers realized a shadow migration had taken place. There were thousands of people whose arrivals were never properly recorded in the official ledgers but whose biological legacy transformed the region. This is a case where the DNA is correcting the official history, showing that the cultural footprint of the Igbo people was far deeper and more resilient than we were led to believe. Then there is the mystery of the Senegambian signal. The ancient remains from the coast of Senegal and Gambia revealed a very specific genetic marker associated with resilience to certain climatic conditions. When scientists looked for this marker in the United States, they found it concentrated in very specific pockets, particularly in Louisiana and parts of Florida. This suggests that the internal migration within the United States, where people were moved from the Upper South to the Deep South, actually followed a biological logic. The people who were ancestors to today's Louisianans often shared a specific ancient West African origin that was different from the people who remained in the Carolinas. We are starting to see that Black America isn't one giant group, but a series of distinct founding populations with deep ancient roots that still remain separate today. One of the most emotional moments of the study came when researchers identified sibling segments. These are long chains of DNA that are so identical they suggest the modern individual and the ancient remains share a common ancestor within just a few generations of the time the ancient person was buried. For a Black American to be told they have a close genetic match to someone who lived in an ancestral village in the 1600s is a revolutionary experience. It turns out the interruption of the Atlantic journey wasn't strong enough to break the biological chain. The genetic bridge stayed intact, waiting for the technology to finally catch up and find it. The researchers also addressed the European admixture question with a new level of precision. While most Black Americans have some degree of European DNA due to the historical conditions of the South, the study found a protective genetic architecture. Over hundreds of years, the West African genetic markers for certain physiological traits remained dominant and persistent, even in individuals with significant European ancestry. The ancient African chassis, the core biological framework, remained remarkably unchanged. This suggests that the African genome is incredibly robust, maintaining its integrity and its connection to the ancient remains despite the immense pressure of the American environment. What about the Bantu expansion? The study compared modern samples to ancient remains from Central and Southern Africa, tracking the movement of Bantu-speaking peoples. They found that a specific Bantu wave arrived in the Americas much later than the initial West African groups. This second biological layer added a new level of complexity to the DNA of Black Americans, particularly in the Gulf Coast region. This means that if you are a Black American, your DNA isn't just a flat record of one place. It's a vertical history of different waves of African civilizations meeting and merging in the New World. You are a biological fusion of the great kingdoms of Mali, the forest states of the Yoruba, and the expansive empires of the Congo. The science also uncovered the hidden gene flow from ancient groups that are now considered extinct or fully absorbed into other tribes. There are certain genetic markers found in the ancient West African remains that no longer appear in the modern African reference panels used by companies like Ancestry or 23andMe. However, these lost markers do appear in Black Americans. This is a scientific bombshell. It means that Black Americans are the genetic curators of ancient African lineages that have been lost on the continent itself. If you want to see the DNA of certain 1700s West African subgroups, you can't look in Africa, you have to look in the United States. This turns the traditional view of ancestry on its head. Black Americans aren't just the descendants of Africa, they are the guardians of its ancient biological diversity. The accuracy of these matches has also allowed scientists to track the movement of music and language through biology. They found that regions in the US with the highest match to the ancient Mande remains are the exact same regions where the banjo and certain rhythmic patterns first appeared. We can now literally see the path of the culture through the path of the DNA. It's not just a story of people being moved. It's a story of an entire civilization's operating system being transported and reinstalled in a new land. The match doesn't just show who your ancestors were, it shows why you hold your rhythm the way you do, and why certain linguistic tones have survived in Gullah and Av. As the study expanded, the shocking match shifted to the genetic health of the population. Scientists found that the ancient West African shield, a set of genes that evolved to protect against specific tropical stressors, has actually adapted in Black Americans to provide different kinds of protection. While some of these genes are now associated with modern health challenges, they were originally supergenes that allowed the ancestors to survive conditions that were extremely difficult. Understanding the connection to the ancient remains is helping doctors develop precision medicine that is specifically tailored to the unique African American genome, honoring the biological reality of this specific lineage, rather than grouping it into broad, inaccurate categories. The study has also sparked a digital homecoming. With this data, scientists are building a virtual ancestral map, where a person from Chicago or Atlanta can see exactly which archaeological site in Ghana or Nigeria they light up on the map. It is moving the search for identity from the abstract to the concrete. It's one thing to be told you are West African. It is another thing to see your DNA pulsing on a screen in direct alignment with a king or a farmer who lived in the year 1550 in a specific valley of the Niger River. This is the end of the unknown. But why was the match so shocking to the scientists specifically? Because for decades, the assumption in the scientific community was that genetic drift, the natural changing of DNA over time, would have made the matches fuzzy and unreliable after 400 years of separation and mixing. They expected the signals to be noisy and hard to read. Instead, the signals were loud and clear. The African American genome has stayed remarkably faithful to its ancient West African roots. This suggests a powerful ancestral pull, where the genetic markers of the founders remain the master code of the population. This discovery also challenges the melting pot myth. While there was certainly mixing, the DNA shows that people from specific African regions often sought each other out in the Americas, creating genetic enclaves. The ancient remains of a person from the Wolof people in Senegal might find their closest match in a family in a small town in Louisiana who have been there for 200 years. This shows a long-term cultural memory that dictated who people married and how they formed communities, essentially trying to recreate the genetic neighborhoods of Africa in the American South. The study also looked at the ghost populations of the Atlantic. During the Middle Passage, it was assumed that so many people were lost that entire lineages were simply erased. But the comparison with ancient remains proves that many of those lost lineages actually survived and thrived. The scientists found resurrection clusters, genetic signatures that were thought to have disappeared during the 1700s but are now showing up in the DNA of thousands of people in the Bronx, Oakland, and Detroit. The people survived, and their code is finally being read by the modern world. As we look at the financial and social implications, this shocking match is changing the ancestry industry. Commercial companies are being forced to upgrade their systems because generic African is no longer an acceptable answer. People are demanding the level of detail that this study proves is possible. We are seeing the birth of microancestry, where you can trace your bloodline not just to a country, but to a specific language group or ancient kingdom. This is a massive shift in how Black Americans view their place in the world. It's no longer a lost history. It is a recovered reality. The researchers also noted the sturdiness of the maternal line. By looking at the ancient West African remains of women, they found that the mitochondrial DNA in Black America is one of the most stable and high-fidelity genetic records on the planet. Even as life changed drastically, the mother's signature remained an untouched time capsule. This has led to the Mothers of the Diaspora Project, which seeks to identify the founding mothers of the Black American population, linking them back to specific ancient matrilineal societies where women held significant power and status. This shocking match is more than just science. It's a reclamation. For a long time, the history of Black Americans was told through the lens of what was taken away: language, names, and religion. But this DNA study tells a story of what was kept. It shows that the most fundamental part of a person, their biological essence, remained untouched, unbowed, and perfectly preserved. The ancient West African isn't a distant, blurry relative. They are the foundational self that is still present in every heartbeat of their American descendants. As we peer into the genetic future of this research, the goal is to create a global Africa database that links the ancient remains from the entire continent to the millions of people in the African diaspora across the globe, from Brazil to Jamaica to the United States. We are realizing that the Atlantic Ocean didn't divide a people, it just stretched them. The DNA is the elastic band that is now snapping back, bringing the two worlds together in a way that is scientifically undeniable. The final takeaway from the shocking match is the power of the pattern. The DNA of Black Americans is a complex, beautiful, and ancient tapestry. It is a pattern that was started thousands of years ago in the African savannas, woven through the tragedies of the colonial era, and expanded into the vibrant culture of modern America. The match is shocking because it proves that identity is much harder to extinguish than anyone thought. You can take the person out of the country, and you can take the country out of the person, but you can never take the ancient code out of the blood. For those interested in DNA, this study is a masterclass in genetic fidelity. It proves that the human story is written in permanent ink. The comparison between the modern and the ancient is a verification of existence. It is the ultimate I am statement. Every Black American who carries these matches is a walking library of Western African history, a living monument to civilizations like the Songhai, the Benin Empire, and the Asante Kingdom. The science has cracked the code, and the results are a celebration of biological continuity in the face of the greatest challenges imaginable. Stay curious about your own code. Your DNA is a silent narrator that has been waiting for centuries to tell you the truth about where you come from. The shocking match in West Africa is just the beginning. As more ancient sites are discovered and more genomes are sequenced, the map will only get clearer. We are standing at the edge of a new era of radical transparency in human history, where the blood finally speaks louder than the books. The connection is real, the match is certain, and the history is officially recovered. In the grand mega-project of human identity, we are finally seeing the foundation of Black America, and it is a foundation made of ancient, unbreakable African stone.